So I'm absolutely delighted that we've got representative voices from cleaners to council leaders who are going to talk about, you know, the very real work that we can all do if the political commitment is there to rebuild our economy in a way that wealth is shared. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have got Sarah McKinley here, who's Director for European Programmes for the US-based Democracy Collaborative, and they've really been at the forefront of thinking and working on the topic of community wealth building for a number of years. We're also joined by Alice McLarnon from the Belfast Cleaning Society, a worker-owned cleaning co-op in Belfast. And we are joined by Jo Cullinane, who is the leader of North Ayrshire Council, and they've really been pioneering community wealth building in Ayrshire in a really holistic and fashion in which it's incorporated right through the local authority and stretching out the way. So it's there's a lot of expertise that Jo will be able to bring to the room about actually making community wealth building work. So how's this going to work? We're going to have our speakers. They're going to talk for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we're going to open up for questions. We're going to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A, and then we're going to bring that to the speakers so you can get clarification. You can ask them to expand on particular issues or cover topics that perhaps they've not been able to go into in detail. And you can also maybe raise points about your own experiences and views on the matter. So we'll be, after the speakers, picking some questions from the Q&A and putting them to the panellists. We're aiming to finish no later than 7:15. So we might not be able to guarantee that every single question will be answered, but certainly we'll notice those questions and we'll answer as many as we can. We've got a hashtag for the event, hashtag rebuilding our economy. If you want to make an impact and spread the knowledge and experience that we gain in this forum further into the wider political culture in Scotland, then push that out in social media tonight, and let's push this conversation out the way to engage as many councillors and politicians and other stakeholders in this discussion. So, also I have to remind you that this session is being recorded and that it will be made online in the next coming days. That's especially important, and a big welcome to all those key workers that are out doing essential work that can't perhaps listen with us just now, but they have such an important role to play when we're thinking about rebuilding our economy, that we've got to make these discussions available for them, and they've got to be like an absolutely crucial part in that. So that's how it's going to work. Without any further delay, I'm going to pass on to our first speaker. Sarah, I really enjoyed you taking part in the launch of Community Wealth Building online in North Ayrshire. Just, I think it was about 2 months ago. That video has been watched by, I think there's 12,000 people now, so it's a fantastic way of kind of sharing your experiences. You're the Director for European Programmes for the US-based Democracy Collaborative, and we really thank you for taking some time to join us today and look forward to your contribution.
Thank you, Jennifer, and it's my pleasure. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and that succinct framing and opening remarks. And thank you especially to the STUC for inviting me to participate in this very important and exciting webinar series. It's a real honor, and I'm very humbled to be on this panel with Jo and Alice, who are really doing the hard work of building a more democratic community, democratic economy in their own communities. So thank you very much. I've been told that my internet is coming in and out. Can everyone see and hear me okay? I hope so. Just let me know if in the chat if there are any problems. I'm here to give a little framing context about what community wealth building is, where and why it originated, and the benefits it brings to communities. So to start with, what is community wealth building? As Jennifer said, we've heard the term, we don't want it to be a buzzword, so what does it really mean? What is at its core? In a nutshell, community wealth building is a system-changing approach to place-based economic development. It works to produce broadly shared economic prosperity, racial equity, and ecological sustainability. And it does so through the direct reconfiguration of our economic institutions and local economies on the basis of greater democratic ownership, worker participation, and community control. So I know there's a lot in there, but what makes community wealth building truly transformative are its core principles, especially ownership, place, institution building, and system change. So let's take a few minutes to dig into each of those. So first, community wealth building requires system change. And this means not just tinkering around the edges to make marginal improvements or attempting, and often failing, mostly failing, to redistribute to even out the ill effects of a lopsided economic model. Instead, it means pursuing fundamental changes to the ordinary operations of the system such that it is capable of reliably generating different outcomes in and of itself. Outcomes like greater regional equity, so that places like the Highlands and the Islands can manage their own assets to thrive, or struggling post-industrial regions like North Ayrshire can build the industries, jobs, and economies of tomorrow. Next, community wealth building is about broadly shared economic prosperity and greater democratic ownership. This means a thriving local economy and requires local ownership where the control and economic advantages of that ownership are spread broadly, and the resulting wealth is not extracted to benefit those at the top as it does now. There's a broad spectrum of democratic ownership forms, which I'll speak to more later in my presentation, which includes, yes, co-ops, but equally important, other collaborative and democratic forms of ownership, up to and including community and public ownership. Community wealth building requires reconfiguration of institutions and local economies. So yes, politics, policy, projects are all really important to advancing this model. But the goal is to build new institutional forms and structures that are rooted in place and are designed to operate so as to produce greater democratic participation and control, and to build a power base in communities to produce real political economic change and sustain the movement over time. Lastly, place. Community wealth building is not an abstract approach in the ether like much of our modern capitalism, but a place-based one that touches down and is changed by, as well as changing, the real living local economies and communities in which we all live and work and play and exchange. So let me turn to how and why it emerged by talking about a couple of examples and places that have begun to put community wealth building into practice. You've probably heard of some of these places as they've become most closely associated with the development of the community wealth building model. So community wealth building as a new frame for thinking about local economies first emerged more than a decade ago in the United States to challenge the underlying logic and failures of the trickle-down neoliberal economic model that we're all too familiar with. It grew from a simple idea, but one that is fundamental to the understanding of political economy and has been articulated by many over the years, and even the likes of Scotland's own Adam Smith. And that is, whomever owns and controls assets and capital determines the type of economy we have and who benefits from it. So from that starting point, a number of things flow, including the beginnings of what is now becoming a movement to deploy and build community wealth. So it first started in Cleveland, Ohio, in the Midwest of the United States in the mid-2000s, where my own organization, the Democracy Collaborative, worked with local institutions and community groups to develop the Evergreen Cooperatives, a network of green employee-owned cooperatives in disinvested, largely African-American populated communities. These co-ops were deliberately created to supply goods and services directly to the hospitals, universities, and other what we call anchor institutions in the city, institutions that are rooted in place and will not get up and leave. unlike the large private for-profit corporations, such as the Fortune 500 companies, of which there were many, that fled Cleveland in pursuit of cheaper operating costs in the post-war period, leaving behind a trail of disinvestment, deindustrialization, and community devastation, which included empty factories, empty houses, half-empty schools, hospitals, public buildings, unused infrastructure. This is unfortunately an all too familiar landscape in many US cities, and here in the UK as well, as you know. But at that time, Cleveland was second only to places like Detroit for poverty statistics. For example, half of all children living in Cleveland at that time were living below the federal poverty line. And yet, in the middle of all this blight were the largely untapped economic powers of large institutions like the Cleveland Clinic, Case Western Reserve University, and university hospitals, amounting to over $3 billion a year in procurement of goods and services. So community wealth building was designed to rewire the Cleveland economy to benefit those who had been left behind by creating new businesses rooted in and owned by community members, drawing upon the purchasing power of those large public and nonprofit anchor institutions. The 3 evergreen cooperatives now employ over 200 people locally, all of whom earn a living wage and have the opportunity to share in the profits of the companies. And just this summer, the laundry beat out Sodexo, a multinational corporation, for the full laundry contract of the Cleveland Clinic, the largest hospital in the region. And in the process of buying out Sodexo's plant, they gave each employee a raise and fast-tracked them to becoming owners in the company. Nothing was lost, not a single job was lost, except for some profits for Sodexo's absentee shareholders. Since then, community wealth building has spread across the United States and overseas, and especially, and most excitingly, to the UK. Cleveland inspired Preston in Lancashire to pursue a community wealth building strategy. You've probably heard about this. It's garnered a lot of attention. And over the last 5 years, leaders like Councillor Matthew Brown, with the support of our partners at the Center for Local Economic Strategies, have been able to repatriate over £1 million in local spending, invest their pension fund to support local housing, are about to launch a local mutual bank, as well as a network of unionized employee-owned cooperatives, starting with a local taxi company. So let me just pause here for a moment to go back to the spectrum of ownership forms that I mentioned before, to underscore something that I fear is often misunderstood regarding community wealth building, including sometimes among trade unionists. So while cooperatives of various forms, as well as social enterprises and community businesses, are a key part of the community wealth building model, they are only one set of tools in the toolbox. We at the Democracy Collaborative and our partners who promote community wealth building believe that these forms should be used as a replacement for private sector corporations, displacing the big multinationals that suck money out of our communities. So let me be crystal clear. We only advocate this approach in the private sector. Public budgets should be used to provide public services delivered directly by the public sector or publicly owned companies. Public ownership is an integral part of the community wealth building approach, and we support insourcing any services that have been privatized as a necessary means to achieving equity and sustainability in communities. And of course, we have seen this more clearly than ever in our current COVID moment, where the effects of austerity and privatization have left our communities unable to sufficiently respond to the health emergency and deliver services to those most in need during the shutdown of much of our economy. COVID has made it so that the previous difficulties and failures, as Jennifer pointed out, of our economic model have become utterly intolerable. This pandemic has torn back the curtain and showed us what is really important, and that is not high finance, but it is the real economy of care and food and health and well-being. The challenges we face as we move into the post-COVID recovery period are many. A shattered economic landscape in which all of the previous problems of inequality, regional imbalance, and disinvestment are compounded. So we must make sure we do not repeat the mistakes of the 2008 financial crisis, in which the corporations and the wealthy were bailed out at the expense of the vast majority of us. There must be no new era of austerity. Instead, there must be an era of economic rebuilding, reconstruction, and transformation, beginning in communities. It's now the time to move community wealth building from the fringes to the mainstream as our main means of economic rebuilding, as they're doing in Belfast and North Ayrshire, as you will now hear. So at the Democracy Collaborative, we look forward to continuing this community wealth building journey with all of you as we build the new kind of economic system and the real living local economies that we need to meet the growing challenges of the 21st century. So thank you so much. And I'm really excited to hear from Alice and Joe as they talk about how they're making this work in their communities. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fascinating and a real interesting historical kind of context to the journey that your organisation has helped many people on. I'm absolutely delighted that we are particularly looking at the world of cleaning next and how we can think about building a better world, because never has cleaning been so relevant to us all in terms of keeping us safe, and never has the skills of cleaners been, you know, so undervalued in society up until now. Many cleaners work in low pay, it's precarious work, it can be invisible work for the people who do it, who take part in cleaning work in times when buildings are empty and no one else is there. So in many ways, you know, they can be a workforce that voices aren't heard and aren't seen. So it's fantastic to look at an alternative model, as Sarah talked about, in practice, in action. So welcome Alice McKinley from the Belfast Cleaning Society, a worker-owned cleaning co-op. So that brings, not only is it worker-owned, but you know, integral to it is that those cleaning workers feel respected and treated with dignity as they take part in the company that they own. How fantastic. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you on behalf of your colleagues, Alice, and looking forward to hearing a bit of your story.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Very happy to be here with this great panel of speakers. To give you the background of the Belfast Cleaning Society, I need to give you the steps before that. I also work for an organisation called Trademark, and we're a social justice organisation based on the Springfield Road interface. For anybody that doesn't know what the interface is on the Springfield Road, it is a 2.5 mile long, 60-foot wall that divides two communities, the Catholic community and the Protestant community. And that has been suffered an awful lot of conflict, deaths throughout the 30 years of the conflict. Trademark is an organisation, as I say, it's a social justice organisation, and we provide training, human rights and equality, anti-sectarian, anti-racist training, political economy and conflict resolution. In 2010, 2011, there was women's group who were part of a cross-community workers or women's groups who were doing their training, completing their training, and as most community organisations know, you get a small pot of money and it's a small fund, and then once that pot of money is gone, the funder basically comes back and goes, that's it, bye-bye, now I have nothing left. But these women had grew as a group, they had felt empowered, they had their confidence built, and they had made true friendships and true trust between one another. So in 2011, the women says, we don't want to stop here, we want to go further. Now, a lot of these women were cleaners, and they were professional cleaners, but they were being treated very, very badly. Precarious working hours, minimum wage or below minimum wage. One week you were going, the boss was telling them you have 10 hours, and next week they were saying you have 6 hours. And these women weren't being treated very well. And Trademark is an organisation that helps support, advise and guide and start up cooperatives. And the next step was, let's start up a cleaning co-op. So in October 2011, the women got together and they completed their first job, and it was when the MTV Awards came to Belfast, and the women completed their first job and cleaned up after Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber. So what I'm going to do with you now is share a small presentation so that you don't have to look at my face completely the whole time, and that you can have a wee look at some of the women who are involved with this. So sorry. So as I say, the cleaning co-op started in 2011. They legally became registered in 2012, May 2012. For 5 years in a row, they cleaned up out not only inside office blocks and community organisations and some trade union buildings, but they also did outside jobs. And this is one picture to show you the before and after of one section of an outdoor festival, which was run every single year, which was the Tennis Vital Festival. They got their banner made by Women's Tech, which is in Belfast as well, and our banner goes with us everywhere. May Day, International Women's Day, and these group of women who we started with 6. Unfortunately, one of our founding members passed away 3 years ago, but we're now up to 12 women, 10 full-time, part-time workers and 2 casual workers. In March this year, in 2020, March this year, we just signed off a £250,000 contract over 5 years, securing 4 more jobs for workers with an innovation factory on the Springfield Road, right on the interface. The women have grown, they train together, they decide together, decide what way their business is being run, they decide on what they're going to earn. They won the Living Wage Employment Award in 2016 for all of Northern Ireland, and they won that award. Now, it's democratically run. There's one member, one vote. We follow the 7 principles of cooperation. We decide what jobs they're going to go to. If the woman wants to work at nights, we try to win contracts so that the woman can work in the evenings. If she wants to work during school hours, we try to make sure that the contracts because the woman wants to work. So we try to work around the woman's life, because, you know, people are going into jobs and they're told you have to work from 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Here's what your wages are, away you go. Where we're in a cooperative, we decide where we work, we decide what we pay, and we decide on the profits, and we decide what way we distribute them profits at the end of the financial year. Obviously, it's not all plain sailing. It's an awful lot of hard work. When we first started up the cooperative, there was an awful lot of sweat equity, and sweat equity means when you're working, but we haven't earned any money yet. So we're building the business up. We're going to do flyers. We're bringing up, putting tenders in. We're site visiting for jobs. You know, we're doing emails, phone calls. So that would be seen as sweat equity. But as the years rolled on and profit was made, then you could go back to how many hours you did at sweat equity, and then you can get paid for that. Collectively, we have to sit down every fortnight. We have now that we're having Zoom meetings rather than face to face, but we sit down, we go through the workers, the jobs that we have, we go through what jobs need to be tendered for, anybody need annual leave, but we vote on it, we decide on it, and it's all democratically run. When a new member comes on board, she will work alongside another member for 6 months, and she will see, you know, how the cooperative ethos is, how we work together. We won't employ anyone until we have secured 16 to 20 hours so that that person is actually going to work a part-time job, or if we secure 40 hours, then that person can work a 40-hour job, but we will keep them jobs going until we can secure enough hours for someone to come off benefits and to actually be employed on a part-time basis and then grow to full-time. We always have to have agreement on the path that the cooperative takes. You know, we're all working towards the same goals. We want to make sure that our cooperative is always the better working conditions, better say in the business. We're always going to be living wage employers. We also want to make sure that our workers and our members have dignity at work. I remember saying a talk before, and Jennifer, you said about, you know, that during COVID, you see how much cleaners are seen and how much they're needed, and care workers and frontline workers and delivery drivers and shop workers. And these jobs were always seen as invisible jobs. They were just done. And I remember many years ago, I did a presentation to a load of councillors in Belfast, and I says, if every CEO of every business stopped working for a week, it would be very, very hard to know, wouldn't it? But if every cleaner stopped working for a week, and the bin men and the cleaners in the schools and the hospitals, don't clean your own house for a week, you'd really notice, wouldn't you? And now that COVID-19 is here, you see how valuable these jobs are. But we've been saying that in the cleaning co-op for this last 9 years. You know, this is a very, very important job. So we try to empower the women and say, you know, this is a very valuable job that you're doing. You're not invisible. But now that the things are starting to go back, are we going to start seeing the cleaners and shop workers and delivery drivers and our frontline workers in the hospital, are they invisible again? Well, time will tell. I think it's already starting to tell. The future of the co-op, we want to grow it. We want to make it larger. We're thinking of expanding into laundry services. We're thinking of expanding, getting, you know, going all around different areas and bringing members in and more workers in. We're constantly tendering for work. We're constantly in competition with the big private sector cleaning companies within Belfast and further afield. And sometimes we win over these cleaning companies and sometimes they're not very happy with us, but that's really their problem. We're unionised, we're all members of the union and we control it. As I say, we're democratically run and we pay ourselves above the industry wage, and anything at the end of the financial year, any profit that we make, then we decide what we're doing with that profit, whether we pay a dividend to everybody, whether we take half of it and pay a dividend and put the rest into our business to buy new machinery or to update our website or to buy new uniforms. We decide. Whatever we make of our surplus, which is our profit, we decide what we're going to do. And I think that's what every business should be, and I think that's the future of running every community. For to build community wealth, you need to keep it within the communities. You need to help it grow within the communities, and that's what the Belfast Cleaning Cooperative is about. And that's that finished, and that's me. So any questions, give me a shout. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was really inspiring. It's fantastic to have, you know, an example in front of us, because quite often, you know, people say the principles are great, but how does it actually work? While we're not saying that the answer to everything is workers' co-ops, we are saying that, you know, that's part of some of the solutions that we can look at in community wealth building, and it's certainly inspiring to me to hear from Belfast Cleaners again, because they're pioneering work at the Royal Victoria Hospital and their equal pay claims in the 1980s, you know, certainly laid the way for our campaign on equal pay in Glasgow just over a year ago. So it's fantastic to see that pioneering spirit to improve the lives of those who work in cleaning continues in Belfast, and great to have a real live example of that. So, so how do you actually put the model into practice in a community in Scotland? Well, it's fantastic that North Ayrshire have been brave and bold enough to take this challenge on. I've heard Joe Cullinane speak over a period of a couple of years now on his experience of community wealth building in North Ayrshire, and I've never came away uninspired to think that, you know, a better world is possible in our communities all over Scotland. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you here, Joe, and really looking forward to hearing from you about the journey that North Ayrshire have been on with your partners from CLES and from Preston and from America and internationally. So welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks very much for setting a high mark there by saying that I've left you inspired before, but I'm sure I'll not live up to that. But really pleased to have been asked to speak alongside Sarah and Alice on community wealth building, which I believe is one part of a wider transformation that we need to see to rebuild the economy post-COVID. I think the STUC have put together an excellent programme of webinars, and I think that reflects the fact that COVID-19 has first and foremost been a public health crisis, but it's also an economic one. So I do think that we need to not just rebuild the economy, but redesign it. And I think we can start doing that at a local level, grassroots level, through community wealth building. In North Ayrshire, we recognise the need to redesign the local economy before COVID, but now it's an absolute necessity, because North Ayrshire must be one of the best examples of an area that's been left behind by neoliberalism. We were hit with a wave of deindustrialisation in the 1980s under Thatcher. We saw Ayrshire's industrial heritage collapse and disappear, and we've never really recovered for that. Previous councils have played the traditional economic game, chasing inward investment, hoping that the benefits of that would trickle down to communities and people, and we know that that just simply doesn't happen. That traditional approach has left North Ayrshire with a weak labour market. We have the lowest job density in the whole of Scotland, and all the social ills of poverty and deprivation that plague so many of our communities and have done for decades. So it's essential that we rip up that old extractive economic model, which has failed the people and communities of North Ayrshire, and redesign something that's better. And that brings me to our community wealth building strategy, which we recently launched, which is looking at utilising the untapped economic power of the local state to design a new collaborative, inclusive, sustainable and democratic local economy. Our strategy in North Ayrshire, I've been told, is one of the most ambitious models of community wealth building being pursued anywhere. It's got 55 actions across all 5 pillars that CLES shape their community wealth building work around. Those pillars are procurement, workforce, land and assets, financial power and plural ownership. And as well as being one of the most ambitious strategies, I think that we do have the tools to bring that strategy to life and deliver something which is truly radical in Ayrshire. For example, a lot of the media coverage of the Preston Model is focused on how they have used procurement to increase local spend, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that Matthew Brown has achieved all he has in Preston with an annual revenue budget of just £20 million. So to put that into perspective, North Ayrshire's annual revenue budget is around £350 million. We have a £250 million plus council house building programme, and we have the same again with our capital programme. So the Preston Model very much relies on that anchor institution approach that Sarah spoke about, committing other anchor institutions to the same principles that Matthew and the City Council are working to. And if you look across Ayrshire as a region, the public sector spends over £1 billion a year procuring goods and services. So there's a huge potential in taking a regional anchor approach to community wealth building in Ayrshire. But there is a few points I want to emphasise on procurement. First of all, as Sarah was pointing out, it's certainly not about outsourcing. In fact, it very much supports the insourcing of services, as it recognises that municipal ownership is actually one of the most inclusive forms of ownership that we have. And we in North Ayrshire have been insourcing some services. For example, 70% of our care at home services are now delivered in-house, and we're continuing to explore more insourcing opportunities. The second point is, whilst using procurement to support local supply chains is good for the local economy and it's good for the environment, our ambition in community wealth building isn't limited to simply spending more money with local firms. We want to spend more money with cooperatives, employee-owned businesses, social enterprises, etc. It's these generative forms of ownership that have a different set of values to for-profit businesses. And under our strategy, under the plural ownership pillar, we're looking at how do we create new enterprises under these ownership models. It's also in our strategy that our intention is to try and convert existing businesses, particularly family-owned businesses, to employee ownership. That's really important for an economy like Ayrshire's, where family-owned businesses have effectively become the backbone of the local economy following the deindustrialisation in the 1980s that I spoke of. But so few of those family-owned businesses actually have a succession plan in place. So it's fundamentally important that we prepare for that scenario. The third point I want to make is, which comes under the workforce pillar, is the power that the public sector have in its recruitment policies. For the outset of our community wealth building journey in North Ayrshire, we've been working with the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, CLES, and there was an example that their CEO, Neil McEnroe, used at an event that he spoke at, which has always stuck with me. Neil told the event that CLES had been working with Manchester City Council to analyse their procurement spend. This happened before Preston, and I think it was about 2008. But in a large city council, you can imagine that the council was already spending a high proportion of their procurement within the city. But Neil and the CLES team drilled down further into the council spend, looking at it at a ward level. And they found that the most deprived ward in the city of Manchester had businesses who had £10 million of contracts for the councils each year, yet none of the labour market or socio-economic indicators like poverty and deprivation within the ward had improved. So CLES visited those businesses to find out why that was the case. How can you spend £10 million of public contracts within that ward and never see some of those indicators improve? And basically, the businesses with those contracts told Neil and the team, look out there, people around here can't provide the skills and the work ethic that we need as a business. But CLES got them to test that presumption with some local recruitment drives, and unsurprisingly, they found that they were wrong and that local residents outside in their front doorstep, actually given the opportunity, could do the job that they required as a business. And through further local recruitment drives in that ward, the indicators did start to shift in the right direction. And I think that that emphasises the power that we as councils and public bodies, as employers have. We're often the largest employer in our area, and by targeting and framing our recruitment policies to target people in poverty and deprivation, we can actually start to shift some of those social ills. And of course, it's not just about jobs that we're talking about, it's about good jobs, it's about jobs that pay the real living wage, and it's jobs that allow people to have a decent standard of living and be able to pay their bills. I just want to touch very briefly on the land and assets and financial power pillars. Procurement isn't the only tool that we have at our disposal. The public sector within our local areas can often own a lot of land and buildings, and that's certainly the case for us at North Ayrshire Council. In recent years, as a result of austerity, local government strategy for those assets has in the main been to see them as something to sell off for a capital receipt to help balance the budget. But a more radical approach under community wealth building would be to use those assets for the common good, transferring ownership to community and cooperative enterprises and putting them back into productive use as part of a locally rooted democratic local economy. We've already got a number of local examples in North Ayrshire of communities taking ownership of land and assets, and many of them actually have received funding for their projects from a community investment fund that myself and the administration set up back in 2017. But now that we've published the community wealth building strategy as a document, we'll be examining all aspects of how we do regeneration as a council and how we use our land and assets as a tool to create a new economy. We'll be mapping land ownership throughout our communities with a view to exploring things like municipal or community-owned renewable energy generation, as well as how we use community wealth building to revive our high streets through buying back empty buildings and bringing empty units into use, potentially again via community or cooperative ownership. And on financial power, I think this demonstrates that the strategy is not just a short-term initiative. Community wealth building is not just something that we see as an immediate priority, but it's a long-term intention to radically redesign the whole economy. And that is demonstrated by the fact that the strategy sets out an ambition to establish a community bank across the west of Scotland. That bank would be mutually owned by its customers, and it would be able to use people's deposits with the bank to create new finance to invest in the wider region. And as owners of the bank, we can shape the investment strategy so it could be used to build community wealth and tackle the climate emergency. To obtain a full banking licence from the Bank of England, it will require £20 million of capital, and to make the bank sustainable, it will require to serve a population far greater than North Ayrshire. So it will need some collaboration with other institutions across that west of Scotland region. And that takes me on to one potential source of capital for that community bank, and that is Strathclyde Pension Fund. A CLES report published last week on local green recovery described public sector pension funds as a reservoir of wealth which has been built in place, and that is correct. These are funds that are the workers' funds. It's theirs and their employer's contribution that make that fund up. And we believe that the fund could provide benefits for its members before retirement, by supporting the local and regional economies that those members live and work, as an alternative to investments in companies like Amazon, the fossil fuel industry, betting companies and the like. A progressive local investment strategy that provides long-term sustainable financial returns to the fund whilst creating jobs in the region could help really take forward community wealth building. It's something that we would be keen to work with the trade unions and other councils on, so it maybe be something that we pick up later on as we go into the Q&A, Jennifer. I could speak for a while longer, but I'm conscious that it's now 10 to 7, so I just want to say this is my closing remarks in my presentation. I'm absolutely delighted that Ros Foyer is a member of our community wealth building expert panel in North Ayrshire. Ros is making sure that there is representation of workers on that expert panel, and she's helping to ensure that we embed the trade union movement and trade union policies within our community wealth building model from the start. And Ros on that expert panel was joined by people like Sarah, who spoke earlier, and Miriam Brett of Commonwealth, who I know spoke at last week's webinar on the Green New Deal. And I don't want you to say this to Ros, Jennifer, but I often describe that expert panel as one of the most progressive panels that anybody's put together. And I'm not necessarily saying that's just because Ros is on it, it's because of the full membership of it. But I'll leave it there, Jennifer. Thanks very much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to participating with Sarah and Alice in the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Joe. Fantastic. It's the forensic approach that you are taking in North Ayrshire to leave no stone uncovered, to think about how we can look at the money that comes into communities, the money that funds communities, and squeeze the absolute worth out of that in terms of jobs and services that deliver quality of life, you know, that are decent. And I think if you go to any community in Scotland and you say to them, what do you want? They won't say jobs, they'll say decent jobs, decent work, decent communities. So there has to be some kind of standard attached to that. So what a fantastic group of speakers. We're getting loads of questions in. We're not going to be able to answer them all, but I'm going to try and theme some up if that's okay. And the first theme I'm going to take is around tendering. So a lot of the way that council money goes out of the council goes through a tendering process. And many people here have talked about, you know, in terms of the money that goes out to be spent on care, in terms of just the other tendering processes. How do could co-ops get preferential treatment in tendering? Is tendering a big problem in the context of private company competition? So I'm going to put that question around tendering to you all first, if I can. You know, can we intervene in the tendering processes? How important is the tendering issue when it comes to community wealth building? And I'm going to go first of all to you, Joe, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, Jennifer, and it's clearly a big issue in terms of how we take community wealth building forward. It's often been something that the Scottish Government have hid behind, as well as EU procurement law. We had the procurement bill going through the Scottish Parliament a number of years ago, and a lot of the asks that the trade union movement had on the real living wage, etc., was blocked because they said that it wasn't compliant with EU procurement regulations. So I think it's not about necessarily how we give preferential treatment to cooperatives. It's about making sure that local firms, social enterprises, cooperatives, community-owned companies actually have a fair crack at the whip, that they are actually able to compete for the contracts. We still have to comply with some of the legal regulations around procurement. What I would add to that, there's two important points probably. One is it's about how you frame the scoring for procurement. So it's this cost quality balance, and I think what's happened in the public sector for a long time is that it's been about best value, not social value. It's been about the money rather than the benefits that the contract will give to people and communities. And that's the first thing. So you need to think about how you start scoring the social value and giving that an appropriate weighting within the scoring matrix. And the second thing is, procurement shouldn't just be seen as a technocratic process. It should be seen as an arm of business development and economic development. So the key point would be starting to plan ahead about what contracts you're actually going to have to start commissioning, looking at how you animate local supply chains and prepare local businesses and sort of co-ops and etc. to actually bid for those contracts and give them the opportunity to compete with the big multinationals. And I suspect that if you ask Sarah the same question, Sarah will tell you that that's what's happened in Cleveland, where they've worked along with the evergreen cooperatives to knock Sodexo out of that contract that you spoke about earlier on. So I think it's the types of actions that we need to take that actually can use the procurement tool for progressive procurement.
Thanks, Joe. Alice, do you want to make a comment on the tendering issue? Because that's obviously something that you guys are really entrenched in.
Yeah, it is. For to say co-ops get preferential treatment is an absolute 1,000,000% no. Most companies, councils, government don't really know what a co-op is, so we can't really receive preferential treatment when they're not even educated on co-ops. What we do hit is an awful lot of the social clauses. When any tenders gone out, where I mentioned on the presentation, the Innovation Factory. Innovation Factory is actually funded and supported by Belfast City Council, and that was put out to tender. That tender, the Belfast Cleaning Society hit. We were in an area of high unemployment. We were bringing people back into work. We were paying the real living wage. There was non-discrimination. We were in areas of high deprivation. So we hit every target there. Not only that, we did our market research. We found out what other companies were charging, and we charged 25 pence, 50 pence less per hour. So we were also value for money, and we were still making a profit, and we were paying, and we are paying the living wage. So any company came in behind us, didn't hit half the social clauses, and we're charging more. So we always try to make sure that we're in there and we're in the middle of it. So definitely no preferential treatment whatsoever, because they don't even know what co-ops are, to be honest with you.
Thanks so much, Alice. And certainly it looks like we need to start thinking about those social clauses a lot more seriously when it comes to tendering, and thinking about, you know, how we name the benefits. I'm going to bring in Sarah, but I'm going to ask you to develop some of the questions that are coming in, because people are talking about what's local. So how locally responsive is this to different economies? Because we've got lots of different economies in Scotland, some like incredible urban economies. I'm sitting in the middle of the Cullinane and Glasgow as we speak, and also, you know, very rural economies. So how adaptable is this model? That's one of the questions we've got in. And there's another one about local. Yes, it's about how local do you go? So in some ways, local, can you be local and so fit different needs? But in other ways, can you scale up the local when we need to do things on a wider scale? Like, for instance, public transport. You know, you don't want a North Ayrshire public transport system, because, you know, sometimes, occasionally, you might want to get out in Ayrshire. But, you know, it's about transport is good when it's connected up. So how do you expand out the way, and how do you expand down the way? And is community wealth building able to do that in communities?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Alice and Joe. I just to finish off with the first question, although I think Joe and Alice, you covered it quite well, and of course, you know, there's much to say on this, and ideally, you know, EU procurement law should be changed, but at the lack of that, there are also other things that can be done locally to help. So for example, one of the things they did in Preston is they broke up contracts into smaller pieces so that it was easier for other more diverse, smaller enterprises to bid on those contracts, making it easier. So there are ways that you can look at the way that you're doing things to make it easier for co-ops or others to enter in on that. And, you know, of course, EU competition theory of, you know, economic equilibrium, which is not at all rooted in the realities of communities. And so it's really important to be able to measure and understand, as Joe and Alice said, the social impacts of the economic activity in place. And so that's a real important part of that. And just really quickly, because there was one question I saw come in that ties into this about the sort of question of, you know, economic planning to help protect enterprises and other things in the market from competition. And in fact, you know, that is sort of precisely the beauty of the Cleveland model, is that by having those direct contracts with institutions, you create, in a sense, a sort of slightly protected market for those enterprises to engage in without having to be sort of ravished by capitalism. You know, that's harder to do with some of the regulations that you have from the EU, but there are ways around it. And in fact, sort of this notion of protectionism is really, you know, this is something that communities have been doing forever, and it's not a zero-sum game. Just like as Joe mentioned and I mentioned before, the Sodexo example, there were no jobs lost. We weren't taking jobs from another enterprise in our community. We were displacing sort of profits from a multinational corporation that would have been extracted from the community anyways. So that's something to consider. In terms of sort of the scale of community wealth building and what that looks like in different places, first of all, it is true that the model has become associated with sort of an urban or post-industrial context, but it can and does work also in other contexts, including hot market cities like London, like New York, and there they might be looking at different things than necessarily creating wealth. They're looking at actually how to better make more equal the wealth that is in those communities already. They're looking at issues of equity and land ownership and things like that. So they're different strategies that they'll be using, but for the same outcome. And also in rural places. So a lot of the work that I've done in community wealth building has actually been with Native American communities in the United States, some of which are the most rural, most isolated communities. And it is true that there are difficulties created with, in doing that. There aren't maybe as many anchor institutions in those communities. However, there are still anchor institutions. There are local governments, there are hospitals, there are services that need to be provided that can be tapped into. And then you're looking at sort of broader, more distributed networks at multiple levels. And there are some really creative and exciting things coming out of rural areas, multi-stakeholder cooperatives, for example, to provide, to help connect small farmers and provide value additive services so that they can address the needs of institutional partners and so forth. So there are examples of community wealth building in different contexts. And in terms of sort of community and how you define community, I think that really is something that will depend on your own community. In Cleveland, for example, it was very intentional that the communities that we were working in were the communities that were the most disinvested and disconnected from the economic activity of the city. So it was very intentional to focus on those communities in order to rebalance, if you will, across the city. And so that is a question that should be really thought about deeply when you begin and engage in a community wealth building strategy. But that being said, a community wealth building strategy should have multiple layers, right? It should have the very, grassroots community level, but as well as sort of a regional policy level. You need to be working in partnership with regions and with the national as well, because you can only get so far if you do things locally before you need to have that connectivity and that broader planning and that ecosystem. That's very important. And so, in fact, Joe can speak more to that, because we're seeing that there are things that North Ayrshire is doing, but there are also things that the combined authorities are doing as well. And that's really important. It's really important for regional equity and things of that nature. So I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Thanks, Sarah. Joe. So in terms of, we've kind of looked at tendering, we've looked at the kind of local reactive measures that can be put in place. I'm going to ask you a question about politics, because you're a politician and you have your own political beliefs. And there's a question came in, and there's a couple of questions came in about the kind of politics of all this. And some of them are saying, you're still affected by the, this is not democratic workers' control we're talking about. You're still affected by the markets, you're still affected by the UK economy, that you can't produce an independent republic in North Ayrshire. So where does that sit? And also I'm interested in the opportunity for cross-party work on this, because you represent an authority which is ruled in administration in partnership with other parties, and you're the leader of an authority which operates politically like that. We've got council elections coming in 2022, and that's been mentioned here as well. So what's your view on the kind of politics of all this and where that's placed?
I think there might actually be a movement for independence for Arran, Jennifer, so if they're able to create that Socialist Republic of Arran, go forward with community wealth building. But I think I would correct you with one point. We are a minority administration, and we have a cabinet system, so it is a one-party cabinet, which has very much been the driving force behind this. But in terms of the sort of relationship with national and regional, etc., I think that Sarah has mentioned that, I've mentioned it in my presentation as well. This has got to be a sort of regional approach for Ayrshire, and it will require as well, with stuff like the bank and Strathclyde Pension Fund, collaboration and conversations and working with other people out with that Ayrshire region. So it's about working alongside those people to try and create a different type of economy. In terms of Ayrshire, we are getting into a really decent place with it. North Ayrshire has led on the development of the community wealth building strategy. We were on this agenda about 2 years ago, and about 6-7 months into that work, we got a £3 million pot of money put into the Ayrshire Growth Deal, which is our version of the City Deal, and that £3 million is for community wealth building across Ayrshire. We've not waited to go at the pace of the lowest member of that partnership. We've went and drove forward, developed our strategy, working with people like Sarah and Neil Ficles and the team, and we've put that together and published the strategy. And now what we're seeing is that East Ayrshire and South Ayrshire are going to be joining our Community Wealth Building Commission going forward after September. So there is that opportunity now to start working with 2 other councils, both of which aren't necessarily the same party as myself, who can now start to look at developing that community wealth building strategy at a regional level. And I think that that's really where the benefit will come. If we, however, look at the Ayrshire Growth Deal as a £3 million pot of money, then we'll do it wrong. We need to be viewing the community, the Ayrshire Growth Deal, as a £250 million community wealth building opportunity. Every single project within the growth deal needs to go through a community wealth building lens. It needs to make sure that there's supply chains, workforce, recruitment. It needs to look at the land and assets and the ownership issues. So that's absolutely key. And I think if we can get that right, then actually it provides a model for changing that extractive model of inward investment, because you could actually look at how that could be done in a different way. And the other point is, and it's called the Ayrshire Growth Deal. It's probably been called that because it was in development a few years ago. I'm actually not pretty keen on the term growth as we start to go through where we are as a economy and where we're going to be post-COVID. I don't know if growth is necessarily the best way to be framing economic development going forward. It's about improving the economy. So it's not necessarily about growing the economy, it's about improving the economy. The economy of the UK is pretty large now. It's just that it's a neoliberal model where the wealth is extracted and people who are rich actually are getting richer and the rest of us are all swimming about trying to feed off the scraps. If we improved the economy, reframed it so that it was socially just and environmentally just, then actually we would start to improve the general well-being and economic position of the nation as a whole. And I think that's fundamentally important as we now start to take that regional approach, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Joe. I think it gives us a kind of framework to really start examining, where the money flows in economies and what's important to economies, because we may have had, growth can sometimes be excessive if it lands only in a small group of people's hands, and that's what we've witnessed in many of our communities, and also a way that we kind of untamed pots of regional funding coming in, and communities not really knowing how they can be part of that or how they can make bids for that or how their needs can be met. I'm going to finish with one last question, and I'm going to put that to Alice. And Alice, the question that's been put up here from one of our participants is about the model of bringing together trade unions and community together with, how important is it for trade unions and community organisations to come together to develop new ideas and new ways of working, and how's that work for you guys?
Well, I mean, every member of the Cleaning Co-op is a member of the trade union movement. We're all members of Unite. We all chose to do that because we see it as an additional arm of democracy that's right beside us. I think trade unions are quite frightened of cooperatives because we're democratically run and we vote and we decide. I think they have a fear of cooperatives as like we're going to steal our jobs. It couldn't be more further from the truth. It should be a partnership. I think trade unions need to support and work alongside. We pay our fees and our dues every month, and we see it as a solidarity tax to other workers. We're workers and we support other workers, and we see it as when we're paying our dues every month, that's why we're doing that. But on top of that, we also have this huge body of highly skilled people on workers' rights and have all this knowledge and background behind them who will help us grow as a cooperative as well as working alongside us. So I think the partnership should grow. I think trade unions should be more involved in cooperatives. I think trade unions should be more in when companies are closing down, should be straight in there to work with the workers to see about worker buyouts. I think they should be skilling themselves up in the knowledge of cooperatives and worker cooperatives and buyouts, because there's very few happening in the UK and Ireland. In fact, there's none in Ireland, and I don't see going to fight for someone to get a redundancy or to get a pay package and that's it, you're unemployed. The way the world is going at the minute, I think if it's a viable business and it's a workable business, then go in and work with the workers to be able to keep that business running and set it up as a cooperative. So I think a partnership needs to be involved, and I think more discussions need to happen, and I think a cement and a foundation needs to be set where co-ops and trade unions are linked together.
Thanks so much, Alice. It's now 15:15. Thanks so much to all our speakers. Certainly you've delivered a challenge in our movement, and I hope that it's a discussion that we can keep going. And on behalf of Glasgow Trades Council, we have absolutely committed to promoting the community wealth building measure, and we have a seat at the Economic Recovery Group in the city, and we have already started speaking to them about the fact that we want them to start looking at this model and examining it. We're more than ready for a model that delivers better for the citizens of Scotland, particularly for the 540,000 trade union members who work hard, who've looked after us during this COVID crisis, who we have relied on to keep us safe, and they absolutely deserve a better Scotland. So I'd just really like to thank Alice, Joe and Sarah for your fantastic contributions and for taking the time to join us today. We've had great participation, big numbers in the webinar. I'd also like to thank Karina, Dave and Francis, who sadly you can't see, but they are behind the scenes here, making sure that all of this works efficiently and well, and they've done a fantastic job in that. This has been recorded and it'll be available in the next coming days. So if you've enjoyed it and you want to share it with people, please do, particularly bringing it to the attention of anybody who's got local influence politically in your communities, who you think you want to bring these ideas to. Next week's webinar is on public and democratic ownership, and we have another speaker from the Democracy Collaborative, Thomas Hanna, as well as Professor Sean Moore from our social care system and the Director of Commonwealth Think Tank, and Matthew Lawrence on the Director of the Commonwealth Think Tank, Matthew Lawrence, on democratic ownership of the digital infrastructure. You can register for that and find out more information online from the STUC's website, www.stuc.org.uk, or Facebook or Twitter, and we'll make sure and email all of you who've participated tonight with details about that event and the others. So a big thank you to our guests. Stay safe, everybody. A big thank you for taking part in the discussion, and we'll look forward to the exciting work that we'll start to see on the ground in the light of this, really interesting contributions that we've got in this new model that we have to work on. We've got to make sure that it doesn't become just another buzzword, that it actually we look at putting into practice, because think about the difference it could make to ordinary people's lives and all our communities. So thanks very much, folks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.